You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Hello and welcome to TFM's local watering hole, and I am just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing. And people keep asking me after 400 episodes, are you back? And I'm thinking, yeah, I'm back. And so it's Christy Morris.
You couldn't get out of the old life, huh?
Every time I think I'm out, they just keep pulling me back in.
Same.
So, yeah.
I even wore all black.
Well, looking good in black too. So very nice.
You could
very
say
sharp,
I'm back
very
in black.
Sharp.
Hey.
Oh, look at that. Yeah. Well, we are excited to be back. We're going to be starting a new series, especially as you start to look towards 2023 when there are going to be a lot of films that are coming out. A lot of them have been delayed. And one of them that is going to be coming out is actually John Wick 4. And, I think they're actually finally going to do the Continental series that they've been talking about as well. So we've got a lot of stuff coming out in the John Wick universe not too far from now. And so we figured, hey, let's start the series. And so we're going to be talking about John Wick's first film. But before we do that, of course, as always, we thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate you listening. It means a lot that people actually listen to the show. And if you would like to interact with Christy or I, one of the best places to do that is over on Twitter at the 602 Club, which is the show account for the entire show. So that, as well as Snyder Cuts and Assembling Avengers, all of that you can find there on Twitter and talk to Christy, myself, of course, John Mills. We would love to be able to interact with you. So please follow us over there. You can also find us on Instagram at the 602 Club, TFM. We've got the entire network on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM, where you can also find, of course, the 602 Club, as well as in the listeners-only discussion group called the Babel Conference that you can join. And you can talk to listeners from all over the world about every single show here on the network. And then we've got our website at trek.fm. If you would like to support us, we would really appreciate that. We are a lot lower than we would like to be in our monthly goal on Patreon to be able to keep the network running. So go to patreon.com/TrekFM and see how you can be part of the team. And then, of course, make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening to this, so you'll get the podcast as soon as it drops. And then if you would like to really help us out, go over to any of the local podcatchers that allow you to leave a review, like Apple Podcasts or Spotify or any of the like, and give us a star rating and a review. Really does help people find the show. So, well, Christy, we are starting John Wick as the series, and this wasn't on the outline, but it's something we often talk about, which is just kind of when we first were introduced to the film or saw the film. And so was this one that, you saw when it came out in the theaters in 2014, or was this one that you found later on, because it kind of became a cult classic?
This was one I actually came to a little differently. At the time, I was going through some serious medical issues and was in and out of the hospital, actually. So we did not get to see it in the theater because of that. And then I finally heard about it and was curious, especially being a lover of Keanu Reeves anyway. And I remember vividly my dear friend Kevin Reitzel, who you probably know.
Yes, I do know Kevin, yeah.
Said, oh man, have y'all watched that yet? And I said, no. And he goes, you haven't seen John Wick? You've been living under a rock? Jeez. So we decided to watch it, I believe, with him at our house because of that. So thank you, Kevin, for making us watch John Wick, because, here we are now. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one that I actually saw in the theater in 2014. 14. And, like I do enjoy Keanu Reeves, and I remember just seeing the trailer and think to myself, well, that looks like a lot of fun. And of course, it definitely, everything about it kind of has almost a Matrix-y type of feel. Mm-hmm. Keanu Reeves has already been great in that when it comes to doing this type of action film. So to see him in this role, was not a stretch in any way, shape, or form. And so I was, excited to see this movie. And in all honesty, I just remember coming out of it and thinking, oh, that's a great action film. Like that. It's kind of, in many ways, everything you want an action film to be, which is kind of wall-to-wall action for the most part. And, really, in some ways, kind of reminded me of a slicker, 80s, 90s action movie. Mm-hmm. Just really well done, really well shot, all those type of things. And so, yeah, for me, getting into the John Wick series, which, of course, had no idea would become a series, but yeah, I was glad that I had seen it in the theater back in. And, it's always interesting as we go back and rewatch these movies, especially ones that have been out for quite a while. I haven't seen this first one in quite some time, and I forgot that, it has a cold open where the movie starts basically at the end. And then it kind of slowly builds into the movie itself. So, getting back into the film, how did you feel, kind of being like just immediately dropped in to this scene and realizing, of course, oh, well, this can't be where we're starting?
Well, that is my favorite way to start a movie. I feel like every movie should start with a cold open. Don't give me the expositional dialogue unless you're Star Wars. I love this kind of thing. And I think that you can definitely grip an audience better when you throw them straight into the middle of the story and then have to explain as you go. So I love that rewatching this, that was something that surprised us as well, that I just did not remember it starting that way. And then too, like you said, I definitely agree that doing things like The Matrix or even other action films like Point Break and Speed, this was not something new role-wise for Keanu. And I think even is interesting in the way that they style the character of John Wick to be almost like a little bit of Constantine even. He's definitely got that vibe of going back and forth, almost like a Jekyll and Hyde between two personalities. He's either the adoring husband who's left that life, or he's like the devil.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to put it. I think dropping you into that scene as the cold open is definitely a great way, I think, to catch your attention immediately. Mm-hmm. And, it does kind of leave you wondering because they leave it on a cliffhanger until you get back to that scene of whether or not the character will die or not.
Right.
And I think that as you do that throughout this movie, you're thinking about that. Is this character, John Wick, is he not going to make it because this is kind of his last hurrah? Mm-hmm. And I think it gives you that trepidation throughout the entire film, and an unease in some ways about, he's not going to die throughout a lot of the things he goes through, but you don't know if he's going to make it out of the film alive, which is a great thing for the cold open to do and kind of leave you in that spot. But, the other thing I think that the film does here from the open is that it builds slowly. It lets us into the loss of his wife, and his emotional struggle with dealing with that. Obviously the delivery of the puppy, But even before that delivery of the puppy, I mean, we see this guy, going to an airfield and trying to work off frustration by driving like a maniac.
Right.
And which at the same time, and this is something that the movie does, I think, a really good job of, is the way in which it allows you to see the character doing things that are going to come back into play later.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you a understanding, okay, I know what this character is capable of in many ways because I've already started to see what this character is capable of in a different context, and then they put it into the action context, and you're like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing there at the beginning of the film.
Mm-hmm.
So that slow build of the film, I think, does a really good job there at the beginning because, it's slower than you think it would be at the beginning, and then all of a sudden, you snap your fingers and you're off and running for the rest of the film. But I really think they do a great job. You give it that cold open, they give you that slow build there then, and it really does a great job, I think, of setting the tone of the film.
And that you don't necessarily, you don't know this whole other past that he has actually until you're further into the film when you meet Vigo. And I don't think it's really until Vigo is explaining to his son that he just opened up a whole can of worms by attacking this guy in particular that you really understand what John Wick is capable of, and that he's more than just this man that's had this series of unfortunate circumstances. I think that adds a whole other layer to it, obviously, because they don't give any of that away until that point.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true because, before that, you really do kind of, you get the sense like there's something about this guy, the fact that he can go into the airfield
by just nodding at a guy.
Yeah, exactly. There's something about him that's different. But again, that's one of those things where we're setting up us to get to that other place, right?
Right.
And I think that's so cool because we truly do have a really well-crafted film. It's very tight in its storytelling so that, again, a lot of the things that they're setting up at the beginning, slowly but surely, and then when we just, we snap our fingers and we hit the ground running, you feel ready for it, And so I think that that's really, really smart.
Oh, definitely. And there's so many things here to unpack as well with just not really giving much dialogue for a while. It's very visual, and if you're not paying attention to all of the cold open, then there are important things you would miss. So, yeah, I thought it was great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I 100% agree with you. Obviously, one of the key things for this film comes down to the casting of Keanu Reeves, and we already talked just a little bit about that idea. But I think one of the beauties of this is that even before we get into them filming and we're talking about his performance and everything, he becomes a real champion of the script and helping with the script. And then he helps bring in the directors and who are both people who have worked as stunt performers, stunt coordinators. They actually work in tandem together, although David Leitch actually isn't credited as the director, but he actually did help with the direction of the film. And so he is integral to the creation of this movie, the actor. Keanu Reeves is somebody who is actually responsible for much of the way that this movie turns out, which I think is actually really impressive. It brings to mind, we see the same thing with somebody like a Tom Cruise, who becomes very invested with the movies that he makes and the characters that he's playing, and working very diligently to create films that he would want to see, that he would be proud of, and I feel like Keanu is very much involved with that here. And so, as much as we would praise anyone, I think one of the people to really lift up in this film is Keanu Reeves for the way that this film turns out in the first place.
1000%. And I will say, I've wondered, because of knowing some of his personal story in life, if that didn't influence this character greatly as well, because he also is personally no stranger to tragedy and did lose his wife. So I wonder if that was also a big part of why you end up with that as the basis of this story. Although obviously Kolstad wrote the script, they did work on it together later on. So I just wondered that. But also, he is such a person that is so devoted. Like you said, the first person I thought of as well that would be similar is Tom Cruise, to making it the best it could possibly be and really caring about the writing of the story. And also, they've said multiple times that he cared about all of the other characters and how they're all interwoven together more than the screenwriters originally did. That it was originally much more focused on solely John Wick, and it was Keanu that came in and said, no, these other 4 that he's really surrounded by more than anyone else are every bit as important and need to have a bigger role than they do.
Yeah, which is a huge benefit to the film, because I think, as we move into the rest of the movie and, the character of John Wick gets plugged back in to this universe that we weren't aware of beforehand, right, that this character has really been a part of, as he slowly works his way back into that. And we see all of these connections that he ends up having because of who he was before. I think it does make a huge difference to the film that those other characters then have not only a part to play, but a personal connection with him, which then, of course, leads you to not knowing which side of the coin they're going to end up being on, Mm-hmm. And are they going to choose to be supportive of John Wick or not? And
right, like Marcus, played by Willem Dafoe.
Yes. Yep, 100%. So, I think one of the things that I really appreciate too about his performance, and it's something that you had sent over to me, and you have the great article that came out in Men's Health back in the day where, they were talking about the work that Keanu put into making sure that he looked like he knew what he was doing when it came to the handling of the weapons he was going to be using, that he looked like a professional. And I think, that comes down to his dedication to the performance, his ability to do these action scenes. Obviously, we've already seen him be able to do action scenes in The Matrix, be able to use guns in The Matrix. But here, it clearly is, I think, impressive in the sense that, this guy looks like a trained killer, and he looks like the best of the trained killers. And so his dedication to that performance, I think it changes the movie, because you believe this guy could walk into a room and be able to kill everybody else without basically getting a scratch.
Right, and be so excellent of a marksman at pinpointing exactly who his targets are, and mostly using a silencer to wipe people out before the rest of them even know he's coming. I think that it also made people even bigger fans of the film to see these videos later of him in Men's Journal, because it felt like he cares this much. And also, dang, I wouldn't want to get in a fight with him in real life either.
Right.
And he also did choreography. He didn't just do the marksmanship training, but he learned things like jujitsu, and some really interesting things that kind of give it a samurai vibe. So the fighting was also mostly him doing his own stunts as well.
Which I think, again, we've seen his ability to be able to do that. And so, it makes sense why he would be attracted to this role in so many different ways. Like you said, the personal nature of this story and where it would connect with him. And then, of course, very much his love of kind of doing these type of films, these type of action roles. He's definitely a character who loves that. And so I think I don't know if enough can be said to how much he makes this movie work. And it really is very impressive. And I think one of the things that I also enjoy is that, he gives us the ability to be able to have that question of the impact that this life has on you.
Right.
And the fact that this life leaves a mark, and can you ever really escape a past like this? Or is it always going to haunt you? And I think that's a really interesting question, because, can you ever escape a violent life like this? That's a really interesting question.
And one that I feel like they've still left fairly open-ended, but lean a little bit toward probably not, just in the fact that I feel like they kind of make the same point that like Spider-Man makes, right? Where everyone that you love will always be vulnerable, even though you've supposedly tried to leave that life. Like Vigo says as well, it does follow you like a curse. So, Vigo even connected it to maybe it was God's repayment of your past that your wife got sick and died, because this is you reaping what you sowed. So it is very interesting from that perspective as well, and showing the juxtaposition of the two of them, where Vigo has accepted that this is his lot in life, and that his son made his bed and now he's got to lie in it. And he's trying to tell John Wick that he's done the same thing, and that you're not better than me in that sense. You're not going to be able to get out of it. Whereas John really thought he could, and maybe still thinks he can, because it does seem that he's got a shred of good in him. And that when he went into the bathhouse, for example, did you notice that he never killed any of the women? Yeah. So
yeah, he doesn't kill unnecessary people.
Right. Anyone that's innocent, that's not coming after him.
Well, and it was interesting too, because I think the question is then accentuated by the fact that his wife had left him the dog on purpose, and she felt that he needed that continued connection with something else to help him be able to see that there's more to life, right? And the idea of being loved, right? And that life really is not about all of this other stuff. It is about the love relationships that we have. And by her being taken, that she worried that would be something to which he would get dragged back into this life.
And shut himself off.
So, exactly. And so she knew he needed this connection with something living, with something real, and something to love, and something to be loved by. And I think that's just a really important question and issue. And I think that's one of the things that is okay, when we ask the question of whether or not, you can escape a past like that, I think the only way that you can is to be able to have somebody there for you who sees you as something different.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously his wife did that for him. And now that she's gone, it's, it's a question of whether or not, he would be able to move forward, or if he's just going to be stuck back in that life, and of course, the famous statement of the movie that we were referencing there at the beginning of I'm thinking I'm back, and he's back because of a very different reason than before.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be business, but now it's personal.
Right. Well, and I think that they also show that he's not all bad in the sense that he clearly does have that unconditional love for the dog that he is given. And they show how truly horrible someone like Yosef is to be able to kill someone's dog. I think we would all agree that you have to have no soul to kill a dog.
Yeah. I'm not a huge dog fan, but that's just not cool.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Because it's something that's so pure, I guess I would say. They're innocent, they're pure, they literally love anyone that will love them completely unconditionally. They're devoted. And so it's like it just completely is grotesque to do something like that to something like that.
Yes.
And so they're showing that he had a shred of hope in him because of his wife and because of his dog, and that was taken from him. And I like that he explains it like that to Vigo. He's like, your son took the only hope I had left in me. That's how we got here. So no, he deserves everything he gets.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely true. Which it kind of leads me into, the story here for the most part, it's somewhat simple in the fact that, he's out for revenge because somebody killed the last present that he ever got from his wife.
And stole his car.
And stole his car, which, of course, we don't even get to get back yet in this movie. And so, maybe they'll do a part 2 and we'll get to see him get his car back. So, which is a gorgeous car, by the way. In fact, he only drives gorgeous cars, which is awesome. But, I think that in many ways, they do a great job of making this film relatively simple in the plot and not overcomplicating things. And that helps, I think, this movie be really successful. And I think it's also a movie that it makes it really accessible to people as well, because, this is a movie that anybody can watch at any time, maybe not, obviously, kids, but like this movie, you can pop in and watch at just about any time. You don't, it doesn't take, quote unquote, a lot of brain power to watch this movie. And that's not because it's a bad movie. It's just because the movie rightly understands how to create a plot that draws you in and keeps you going without unnecessary complications.
Exactly. And honestly makes it even more fascinating to me that this is the first directorial debut of Stahelski. I guess is how you say his last name. He was a stuntman that Keanu knew from doing The Matrix with. And Keanu said that because of the work he saw with the stunts being done back then by Stahelski and Leach, that he felt like this movie would be right up their alley, and that he was secretly hoping they would agree to direct it because he thought the treatment they would give to it would fit so well. And clearly it did, because they did more.
Yep. No, absolutely. And I think this is one of those things where I'm always just really impressed by the writing, and something that, I think connects really well with that, though, is the fact that, yes, this is a simple story, but there is some really interesting world building that's going on, in the sense that we're dropping you into this whole other side of the world we don't basically know exists, right? This world of assassins. And their world has all of these very interesting rules to it. They use gold coins, and there's this place called the Continental, which is, a meeting place for them, and a place where, it's supposed to be basically Switzerland. And, you're not allowed to do any company business there, but you can have meetings and stuff. And, the idea of that there's this world of high-priced assassins with their own rules, with basically their own kind of form of government, really, like it's such really cool world building. And I think that may be the thing that is what kind of spurred them to do more films, right? Because people wanted to see more of that. They wanted to see that expounded upon, because they felt like they did such a good job here. But obviously we don't get all of it. They put in, I think, just the right amount of world building without overloading you in any way, which is a key to also the story there. You can't go overboard on the world building, or else you'll kind of the film will feel crushed under the weight of that.
Right, like some of the best movies, it keeps you interested in this one and in possible future ones because of the mystery, because they're only showing you the 10% on the surface, and that there's all of this other underworld going on that you want to know more about. And so that's why I love that, even like with the lighting of the Continental, at the front desk, it's like you only really see the one guy manning the desk, and you don't really know what else is going on in that building at any one time. And how they have this way of speaking even that's in code. And it, like you said, they have a sort of moral code that they go by, that clearly, for example, Perkins breaks.
Yep.
And so it is fascinating, and it pulls together, I think, a lot of interesting things that were true in history, like a speakeasy kind of environment.
Yeah.
That there's this whole world that lives just behind the door that you didn't notice at the end of the hallway.
Right.
So, yeah, it absolutely, the world building was so good, and they kept it simple enough, just like we've talked about how, they did Ghostbusters, for example. They give you just enough to be able to suspend your disbelief, but not to overwhelm you.
Right. No, I think you said it perfectly there. And, I love the idea of what you said, like the speakeasy, because there is this like, neo-noir feel to this whole world, even the way the movie is shot, and the color palette and everything else, the costuming of everybody wearing these, very nice tailored suits that they go to do their business in, and yet, they're all loaded with guns and knives and all sorts of stuff all over them, and yet they look like they're,
going to the bank.
Could be. Yeah, or they could be on a very nice night out on the town, right?
Yeah.
And so, no, I 100% agree. I think, the world, like, you said it so well, the world building here is exactly what the movie needs, and not more.
Yes.
And that's really important that this movie, I think, really finds that balance. And then, like you said, it creates kind of this mystery because, would you like to know more? And
put a coin in the door.
Exactly. People said yes. Exactly. So, you mentioned the fact that, we had Perkins played Adrienne Palicki. I think that's how you say her last name. And, I've known her for a while. Obviously, she was in Friday Night Lights. And so
I knew her from The Orville.
Well, that too. She's in that as well now. But I mean, this cast is littered with people that you have seen in other places. I mean, this cast has Mayhem in it.
It does.
Dean Winters. Yes. So, which he's not in enough things.
No.
But he's so good. I mean, but just the fact that, you were able to get Willem Dafoe and John Leguizamo, Ian McShane. I mean, Bridget Moynihan, a very small role, is his wife. I mean, Alfie Allen, who plays the son, Yosef, I mean, he was in Game of Thrones.
Theon
he would go on to be in Game of Thrones. Yeah, just a terrible, all of these people, they do great work elsewhere. And then Lance Reddick, who, plays Sharon, the concierge at the Continental. I mean, he's so fantastic. And I knew him from Lost. So, this cast is, jam-packed with incredible actors who bring life, no matter how small of a role they have, in such a way that, I forgot that all of these people were in this movie, honestly. And I was loving every time they were coming on screen. And it was just the right casting to make that role come alive. Again, no matter how big or small it was.
Yep. Yeah, I think that they especially really thought about who they were putting as a villain and a confidant and an enemy with Perkins. I think that it wasn't even just the attention you would pay to regular casting, but I felt like it was just so fitting, especially having Alfie Allen as Yosef, because he played such a slimy character as Theon Greyjoy in Game of Thrones, to the point of every time I see him now, I'm like, you. So.
Well, and then he has such a role there where, he becomes one that you end up feeling so sorry for at the end, which that show was so famous for doing, to make you completely flip on a character you didn't ever think you could flip on, So
I didn't.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I mean, I did. I found him to be really sympathetic in the end. But that's a whole other story. But yeah, no, I agree with you. You're absolutely right. He is that type of actor, where he's able to do that.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'm sorry that I keep bringing it up, but I was so surprised with Adrienne Palicki as Perkins, because I've just only known her from The Orville. So she's a completely different kind of character here than she is in, the happy-go-lucky, usually sci-fi show. So I thought that she did such a great job of coming across menacing and conniving and everything you want in someone who is just a gun for hire.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't have a moral code, and then she gets hers for it, because some of them have something at least.
Right. Yes. Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. I mean, and I think that was something where you put Ian McShane in here, who was famous for Deadwood, and, he plays this kind of very suave, genteel character, and yet at the same time, there's a real underlying menace to him. You're not quite sure if you can trust him, or what side of the aisle basically he is on. Is he on John's side? Is he not on John's side? We don't really know. And so, and I think this was the thing too, is that, and you mentioned it earlier when we were talking about Keanu, but where he asked that all of these characters have some kind of relation to John Wick in some way, to make these roles mean more.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so like you said earlier too, you know, when Willem Dafoe's Marcus ends up being on his side, but you're not quite sure if that's going to be the case because you've already gotten the idea that this world is basically a dog-eat-dog world.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, you put him in that role, you believe that he would maybe be the cold-blooded killer who would basically kill a friend for $2 million.
Yeah, I mean, he accepted the contract.
Yeah, exactly. But it's also Willem Dafoe, and we've seen him be villainous before, so...
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's just I think the perfect and right casting for all of these roles, and so obviously, you know, we've mentioned the idea of this movie being an action movie, and of course, you know, there's an incredible amount of gunplay, sort of like gun fu, the fight choreography and scenes with different types of martial arts. You know, you've got car stunt work as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in all honesty, rewatching the film, I was very surprised in a lot of ways just how well not only all of this holds up, but just how slick it is. Like it, and I don't mean that in a bad way whatsoever. Like I mean that as a complete compliment. That everything about this movie just looks so good, you know, so well shot. The action choreography, and the way it's photographed, the lighting choices, like all of these things work together to create an action movie that, you know, I think this was the type of film that was really building upon all the type of action movies that we had got, where, you know, this takes everything from like The Matrix, the Bourne Identity, to the new Bond movies, to all those things, and then puts that all together and creates John Wick.
Yeah, I especially have to applaud here the costume choices and the lighting, because I will say for sure there's a lot of shows and movies now where I've complained that it's too dark, literally. Like it's hard to see what's happening unless I turn out all the lights in my living room. But this doesn't have that issue because they're able to keep it looking dim but still have some pops of color here and there. Like, especially I'm thinking of the bathhouse was very well lit, but still being a very mood set, dim, cozy environment. Same thing with the bar. And then when they go into the club called the Red Circle, and even the way that, John Wick's house is lit when he's being attacked versus when he's going to bed with the puppy, like, that was clearly so well thought out. And like you said, the way it's shot, they thought a lot as well about the sound effects.
Oh, yes.
And then I don't know, it just feels like this quilt of everything that was layered so well together that it just works. Like you said, it's slick in that sense in such a good way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I just... it's the movie has an incredible style in the action, but then even the style that they choose for the way that they do the subtitles is stylized, and it feels like it fits within this world. Like when they speak Russian and it comes up on the screen. Yep. And it just feels like the action was a driver for how everything else in the movie should look and feel. And so it feels very cohesive. And that's really impressive for a movie like this, where, many action movies can feel weighted one way or another. And this one just feels consistent all the way through. And it leaves you enjoying going from one scene to the next. Because I didn't feel like, especially rewatching the film, that there was really any place anywhere that I was pulled out of it for any reason, which is, I think, a really phenomenal place to be. You don't want to be pulled out in any way, shape, or form from a movie like this. And so therefore that consistency in the action, that consistency in the way the movie is shot what it feels like from scene to scene is just really well done. And so, I guess, Christy, that just leads me to the question of, and, I think, I don't know if we've had any part of the movie that we haven't praised, but I guess one question I wanted to ask just beforehand to kind of bring it full circle is, the fact that John Wick lives at the end, did that feel earned and legitimate to the movie? Or do we start maybe even there creating almost a superhero type character, more so than somebody who feels real? Did it work for you that John Wick survives?
It does, because I think the biggest thing they did with that was so important that made it feel that it does work is it wasn't ever easy for him. I think if a main character's journey is not challenging enough and doesn't show that they're a real person that's capable of making mistakes or of getting caught by surprise, where you're afraid at some point they won't survive, if it's too easy, it can come across boring and that something is clearly not as well thought out.
Right.
Because we don't want our hero or anti-hero to have it too easy. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's why this works, because they show that he needed sometimes for Marcus to save him, or he was caught off guard and knocked down by the car toward the end. And even though he survives, he's still almost mortally injured. Yeah. He's barely, skipping out of there. So I think it works because of those reasons.
I think that you 100% nailed why it worked. And that is because John Wick doesn't survive this film without having people who are on his side. Mm-hmm. And so therefore he's not a superhero, because there are places where he would have just been dead.
He did not get out unscathed.
Exactly. So, except for the kindness of I don't know, can you call them friends in this, as close as you can get in this life? He has people that are on his side and willing to help him. And so the fact that he survives does feel earned, because like you said, it wasn't easy. It was hellish. And he almost didn't make it. And because of that, I think it absolutely works that he survives. So, no, I'm glad that's the case. And of course, we'll talk about the other films when we get there. But, Chrissy, it does lead me to that final question as to what you would rate John Wick.
I had to think about it, because I don't give everything a 5, obviously. I think that's really got to be something that stands out in my mind as the perfect quintessential movie. So I don't have anything really negative to say about it, but I think that, maybe one or two little things could have been maybe tweaked. But overall, it's so well put together and simple. I think the biggest thing it has going for it is that it keeps it down to a few characters that are well written. It has good action. I think the only things I could knock it for is that although the sound effects are very good, the music itself, it doesn't really have a recognizable or memorable theme. The only song I really remember from it is the Marilyn Manson song about killing strangers, which is a good song, actually. I didn't think I would like Marilyn Manson music, but there you go. So that's the only thing I kind of think takes me out of it a little.
Sure.
So ultimately, I end up giving it a 4.5 out of 5. Beautiful vintage cars, because dang, I want that car.
Yeah. I hear you. I'm right there with you. When I went back to the film, I think I had it at a 3.5, which I don't know why, because this is clearly 4.5-star film.
Yes.
I mean, it could be a 5 in all honesty, because it might be one of those perfect action films, where it's just like everything works about this movie. I don't think there's anything that doesn't work. I think the only thing that you might have pinpointed there is that maybe the music could have been better, and I might have loved them not using that song twice in the film, which, maybe that's the only critique I have of the film. So, yeah, 4.5 out of 5. This is, just a great action film. It's so much fun to watch, and it's going to be so fascinating to continue on with the series to see where we go, because it's hard to eclipse a start like this, really. And there are very few films to which I felt like the series has actually gotten better. In action films wise, I think maybe Mission Impossible might be one of the few that I felt like to be the case. Obviously, the James Bond series has been able to do that, where you have the up and downs, but you have some really high ups that come, and so. Yeah. Well, Christy, I'm really excited to see, though, what you would want to recommend to everybody this week.
So I don't know if you remember, but we have talked sometimes about things that, although we wouldn't say are incredible pieces of film, they are incredible to us because they're just so beloved personally. And so I've got one of those to recommend today, because I was just thinking along the spy assassin genre. And I remembered a movie that my dad and I have always loved watching together that is just so dang funny, even though it's not, like I said, an incredible piece of film. It's just fun. Do you remember the 2002 film I Spy with Eddie Murphy and Owen Wilson teaming up together?
I do remember that film.
I love that film. It is just so fun. It makes light of the spy genre. Seeing the two of them together in sort of a buddy cop kind of movie is just such funny casting to me. And then, you have people like Famke Janssen in it that really give you that love interest level as well. And Eddie Murphy, of course, is hilarious anytime, but especially in this. So I recommend checking out I Spy from 2002 with Eddie Murphy and Owen Wilson for just a good laugh.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to recommend to everybody, of course, we had just recently celebrated 60 years of Bond. And now, of course, all 25 Eon films are on Amazon Prime. And so, of course, you can go back and listen to every single Bond film. We've done all of them. We haven't done the spoof, but we have done 26 Bond films, including Never Say Never Again. But I just watched, for the 60th anniversary on Amazon Prime, they released a special documentary about the sound of 007, where they talk about the music and the soundtracks throughout the years of Bond. And I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun to be able to kind of go back and hear about the creation of the sound, where it came from. Of course, the original theme by Monty Norman, and of course, John Barry's work. And, it was just great. So I highly recommend you check it out. You don't even have to be a huge James Bond fan. You could just be a fan of soundtracks and film and be able to enjoy the documentary. So that's called The Sound of 007 there on Amazon Prime.
Very
But
cool.
Christy, if people want to catch up with you, where should they look to find you online?
Well, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Bespin Bell, and of course also in the Babel Conference. And when I'm not here on the 602 Club, you can find me on a finished show that I did with my friends Amanda and Teresa called Sabers and Spells on the Skywalking Through Neverland Network. And, who knows what else may be coming down the road. But what about you?
Well, you could find me all over social media under the name MattRushing02, whether that's Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Pharaoh. You can also find me here, of course, on the network when I'm not in the 602 Club with you or with John Mills on Snyder Cuts and Assembling Avengers, which we'll have a new episode of Assembly Avengers coming out this week. You can also find me doing The Orb with Chris Jones, talking about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Warp 5 about Star Trek Enterprise, Saddle Up about Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Literary Treks about the books and the comics of Star Trek, and The Artificial Tango about Star Trek Picard, and then I'm over on the Nerd Party with 2 different shows. One is called Owlpost. That was with Drea Kaufman, and we talked through every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. And then the great John Mills and I are doing aggressive negotiations as we talk about Star Wars each and every week. But thank you so much for joining us.
And y'all come back now, you hear?